Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Berkeley Lab Live Science Series. This is an opportunity to share great hobbies and innovative research here at Berkeley Lab. It's also an opportunity to learn a bit more about specific scientific topics and have the chance to ask our experts in real time. As they share their work and research here at the laboratory, we also include an activity or a demonstration that you can do at home, and we hope you do this with us today. Before we begin, I'd like to share a quick reminder about some information. If you haven't downloaded it already, we have an accompanying worksheet that's just been placed in the chat box. The website includes the worksheet that we have created to go along with this session, but it also includes the other recordings that have been done over the course of this summer. So you can check out our different topics that we've covered around sustainability, crystallography, and making your own yeast at home for sourdough baking. For those who have questions, feel free to use the chat box. We'll be checking for your messages and answering them throughout the session. For those of you joining us for the first time, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, or Berkeley Lab for short, is one of 17 national labs funded by the Department of Energy. You can see us on the map created by symmetry.org here on our screen, and we are located in Berkeley, California. National labs were created to bring researchers together in order to share expertise and expensive and sometimes very large equipment to tackle big problems related to energy. We like to call that team science here at Berkeley Lab. If you have a chance, you should check out this interactive map that Symmetry magazine created to learn a little bit more about all of the 17 national laboratories around the country. On our next slide, you can see an aerial view of Berkeley Lab. We call this the best view from a lab, and we are just below Lawrence Hall of Science, which is a public museum for the University of California, Berkeley, also known as UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley is located right below us, so that means we share common names and a hill, and today we're working together to talk about stars. As I've mentioned, we're working together as a group today. Lawrence Hall of Science and UC Berkeley's Science at Cal are our collaborators, and you can see their Twitter handles down below on the screen. If you'd like to follow them or us, please do. We'll be sharing more information about how you can participate in different activities online and hopefully in person one day, where we do exciting and engaging public activities. I know the Lawrence Hall of Science does a lot of work with bringing in families and working with the community, and Science at Cal works with researchers every single day. You should also check out their Science at Home pages, which have tons of resources and activities, and Jennifer Johnson, who's helping out today, has been putting those in the chat box as well. So today's session will include a little bit of vocabulary, and I'm going to just say them out really loudly for you, but don't worry, they are also explained and definitions can be found on that worksheet that I just talked about. So astronomy, astrophysics, constellations, electromagnetic spectrum, infrared, parallax, and star will all be used throughout, again, this session. So again, we'll be sharing them and talking about them, and their definitions can be found on our worksheet. Now that I've gone over words, I'd like to invite my colleague, Jennifer Johnson, just as I said, who's been adding to our chat box, to our session. Jennifer is a senior research associate at the Joint Genome Institute here at Berkeley Lab and also works with the JGI communications team as their education and outreach coordinator. She will be monitoring the chat box and adding to it when necessary and asking our guests a few questions. Hi, Jennifer, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I hear that you and your son have been doing a bit of research on stars and have a few questions to ask our researchers.
Yeah, we're very excited about star formation and learning all about astronomy, so I'm really excited to get started today.
Awesome. You want to start with the first question?
Sure. So I have a few questions, but I'll start with something simple. And actually, if I can get our audience involved right away, I would like all of you to try to answer in the chat box, where do you think, or do any of you know where stars come from? So I'll give everyone a few minutes to do that. And while we're waiting, I'd like to introduce our first expert, who is Peter Ashton. We're in luck because Peter works on building telescopes to learn about the formation of stars and the origins of the universe. Peter is a postdoctoral research at UC Berkeley and Berkeley Lab. Hey, Peter.
Hi, Jennifer.
So we're getting some answers into that, and one of them is supernova explosion, nebulous, explosions, gas and dust.
Those are some great answers.
Yeah, so can you tell us, help us out with this question and give us some feedback from those answers? Do we have it right, or is there more for us to understand?
Yeah, so it's a big story, but I can outline it from the beginning. Great. So if we want to know where stars come from, at the most basic level, stars form out of these clouds of gas and dust that are collapsing under the force of gravity. And there's a lot of this in our galaxy. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, is a spiral galaxy, which means it's kind of shaped like a big, flat, round disk. This picture in the top right is sort of what a similar galaxy looks like if you saw it from the top. But we live inside our galaxy, so when we look up at the sky and see it, we see it as like a big stripe going across the sky, and that's what's in that big picture. It's kind of like you're inside the frisbee looking at it from the side. And if you look at this picture, you can see a few things. One is that there's all this kind of like diffuse light, and that's the light from many, many stars all added together. But you also see these kind of dark stripes going through the middle of it. And what those stripes are these dark, cold, dusty clouds, and that is actually where stars are forming in our actual galaxy. This is happening in what we call the plane of the galaxy. And one fun fact is that the Milky Way somewhere produces about one new star every year. So that's where stars are forming. The next thing you might ask is, how does it actually happen? So this is a cartoon picture, but we can go through it. You kind of start with one of these dark, dusty clouds that have some little spots inside that are a little bit more dense than other spots. Gravity acts more strongly on the spots that are more dense, so it kind of collapses into first cores. These cores are kind of accumulating more and more matter until they end up with something at the center that we call a protostar. So the protostar is what will turn into the star, and it goes through some phases of collecting more and more material. It starts to heat up as stuff gets more compressed under gravity. It can form a proto-disk around it. At some point, it can develop these outflows coming out of kind of the North and South Pole. And as time goes on, things kind of settle down. Eventually, it turns on some kind of wind that blows out the rest of the cloud. And at the end, you're left with a kind of normal-ish star, something like our sun. And this disk that had been surrounding it can form into some number of planets or comets or other kind of objects that are in our solar system.
That's really cool that we go from a black mass to a bright star. I had no idea there were so many steps to get there. But how can I find where a star is forming? What do you guys at home think? What do you think scientists look for evidence of star formations? Can you answer in the top chat box? So we have some answers coming in. Common elements, telescopes. So those are really good guesses, but Peter, what do scientists do?
Sure. So there are a few different ways we can do this. But the thing to think about is that, these stars that are forming out of cold, dark, dusty clumps of gas and dust, if you were just looking for visible light, you might not be able to see them. So the kind of light that you see with your eyes, if you look up at the sky and see a constellation like this one is Orion, you can see sort of a lot of stars and a few other fuzzy things, but that's basically all you see there. If, on the other hand, you were able to look at the same region in infrared light, so that's light that comes from material that's colder than what you see with your eyes, it would look like like this. Okay, so this is the same area as seen in infrared light. And you can see that in these regions that were all mostly just black, you can see that there's actually all this material that's floating around in there. And there's a lot of activity and structure and things going on. And it's actually these little clumpy bits of stuff where stars are actually forming. And Orion is actually one of the biggest star forming regions in our galaxy nearby us. So this is another region where stars are forming. It's one that I've worked on studying. This is in the constellation Vela. And so this is, looking also in infrared light. You can see that there's all these little wispy bits. There's kind of turbulent chunks and bright spots. And on the left-hand side, you can see I put the size of the full moon for scale. So if you could see this with your eye, this is actually really a huge chunk of the sky. And this is happening, basically, all around us in the sky. You just can't see it with your eye. But beyond this, we can zoom in on one of these smaller regions, this one in the rectangle there. And on the right-hand side here, this is again showing the same, the part that was in that rectangle in visible light on the top and infrared light on the bottom. And again, you can see that, the more you zoom in, the more you can see that there are actually all these, filaments and bright spots and hot spots where star formation is actually happening. And when we're able to zoom in on these clouds that are actually actively forming stars, that means we can ask a lot more questions and learn a lot more about star formation. So for example, you could say, why are stars forming in this cloud rather than other clouds where stars aren't forming right now? You could ask, why do stars form faster in some places and slower in others? You could say, what controls how much of the material from that original clump that's collapsing down to form stars, how much of that material makes it into the star and how much of it gets blown away. And you could also wonder about what controls the sizes of the stars. For example, you might only get one giant one for every 100 small ones, but what controls that ratio? That how many bigs per small? So yeah, we can answer a lot of questions when we observe these kind of regions in the infrared. So yeah, then we could ask, what kinds of tools do we use to learn about this?
And Peter, we have a question from the audience. How long or how much time does it take for a star to form while we're waiting for those answers to come in?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's millions of years start to end. So we say that, like I said, the Milky Way forms one star every year. It has the next million years in the assembly line already. But yeah, the steps are slow, but there's just enough mass out there that a little bit is happening somewhere every year.
So I just want to encourage everybody to try to answer the question of what types of tools do scientists use to learn about star formation in the chat box. And some of the answers coming in so far are telescopes and instruments that can detect infrared light. A lot of people are suggesting telescopes. What do you think, Peter? How are they doing?
That's great. Yeah, you're right on the money. So yeah, we can talk more about some of the different kinds of instruments that we use to look at star formation. The thing to remember though is that because we want to look at the infrared light, we need to make sure that that's what we're able to observe. And this is actually complicated because our atmosphere on Earth actually blocks a lot of the infrared light. This is a graph showing what % of the light gets blocked by our atmosphere as a function of different wavelengths. And so this rainbowy stripe here is what we're able to see with our eyes. So the atmosphere is almost entirely transparent. You can look up, you see the sun, the moon, the stars. But for a lot of wavelengths, especially in the infrared, almost none of that light is able to make it down to the ground. And this is, a lot of it is because of the water vapor that we have in the atmosphere. The water vapor is able to absorb that infrared light. So when we're building telescopes and we want to observe star formation, kind of the name of the game is to be able to avoid the atmosphere and observe that infrared light. And so one way that we're able to do that is with cameras like this. This is something I worked on. The project is called BLAST. BLAST is a telescope that rides on a high altitude balloon. You can see it here kind of down inside these sun shields. There is a big mirror and a camera. Yeah, BLAST is an infrared observatory. We fly this from Antarctica, actually. And so we take this whole thing down to Antarctica, attach it to a balloon, and launch it way, way up to almost 120,000 feet in the atmosphere. And so this is a picture of it in flight on the left. This is right after the launch. You can see that whole, the camera, the telescope that are all on this gondola at the bottom, and it's attached to this helium balloon, which they fill up, bring out to the launch pad, and basically just let it go, and it goes up. The reason that we do this from Antarctica is two things. One is that we can fly, and it's if you go in the summer, it's daylight all the time. The other is that the way that the jet stream and the air currents go, that if you fly it, it'll just go around in a big circle and come back to you in about 2 weeks it takes to go around. So you can launch your instrument, it'll fly, come around in a circle, then you can pick it up and hopefully fly it again after that. So this is one way, flying high altitude balloons is one way that people can build telescopes to avoid this the water vapor in the atmosphere. But we're working on building better and better telescopes all the time. And so, yeah, there's still a lot of science to be done about learning about the way stars form.
Thanks, Peter. We have one more question for you. So someone asked, so you look for traces of infrared light where to look for new stars. If they form in the coldest parts of space, would the heat energy get drowned out by the other sources of heat?
So that's a good question. So for example, in some of these, like the picture I showed of Orion, the actual protostar is getting hotter and hotter as it builds up more material. And for a long time, it's kind of still shrouded in this cold, dark gas. And eventually it's able to burst out of that. And that's actually one of the ways that we can figure out, how far along is it in the process of that million-year process towards becoming a star, to see, how much of the cloud has it blown away, how much can you see it through that shroud of gas and dust. Good question.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. Yeah, that was a great question from our audience. We're going to stop sharing the slides right quick, and I'm going to introduce our next person. So Peter talked about how to use very extensive tools and equipment in order to detect stars in the formation. However, we don't always have telescopes that are available for us to observe. So today we have Ellen Torres-Thompson, who's here to share with us how we can use our computers to look at the night sky. Ellen is a rising senior in astrophysics at UC Berkeley, and she's also a science communicator and educator at the Lawrence Hall of Science Planetarium. And today she's going to give us a crash course in how we identify stars using a web-based tool called Stellarium. So Ellen, I'll let you take it away and show us how we can look at the night sky from the comfort of our homes and computers.
Thanks, Faith. Hey, everyone. So here I am in the web-based version of Stellarium. I believe a link is going in the description, so folks can follow along or have that link handy to check this tool out later. As you see, Stellarium places us in a nice field clear of big buildings that would block our view of the sky. We have our 4 cardinal directions here: north, east, swiping over south, and west. I have a timestamp in my lower right corner that tells me it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In Stellarium, I can actually travel in time. So let's click on this upper hour arrow and watch the sunset. And we'll stop here around 9 o'clock this evening. We see a beautiful sky full of stars. And to get more acquainted with how to explore the night sky in Stellarium, I'm going to walk us through all of these buttons down here. The first one, when I hover over it, says constellations. But before I click on it, I want to know what folks already know about constellations. So if you know any constellations, go ahead and type them in the chat box.
Alan, so some of them coming in are Ursa Minor, Ursa Major. A lot of fans of Ursa Minor. Orion.
Very nice, great answers. So if I click on constellations, I get stick figures and labels of all the constellations. If I pan over to the north, I see our good old friend Ursa Major. You may also know the asterism, the Big Dipper, the 7 bright stars here in Ursa Major. Panning up a little higher up, we have Ursa Minor. The next button gives us constellations art. So this is how folks tend to imagine the constellations. There are 88 official constellations according to the International Astronomical Union. Many of them are based on Greek mythology. You may be familiar with the mythological creature Pegasus, or maybe you know Andromeda and Perseus from the Percy Jackson books. But of course, all throughout history, across different times and cultures, people have come up with all sorts of constellations, and you can come up with your very own as well. The next button turns our atmosphere on or off. I like to just leave it on because I think Stellarium already gives me a bit of an unrealistic night sky compared to what I actually see in Berkeley. Some of you may know that the reason why you don't really see a lot of bright stars in a suburban or city area is because of something called light pollution. To clean up our sky, I'm actually going to turn off the art for now. The next button gives us the landscape. We can turn that off and see things that have already set, or even things that we don't see from our hemisphere, but that's a bit disorienting, so I like to leave it on. Next up, we have the azimuthal grid, which sort of just breaks the sky up into digestible parts. My favorite part of this grid is that if you imagine that you are laying down in the grass of this nice field, then you can look up to the highest point in the sky, and we actually call that point, the very center of this circle here of this grid, the zenith or zenith. If you are looking at the zenith tonight, you'll see one of the brightest stars in the night sky, Vega, right up here. Next up is the equatorial grid, which basically projects lines of latitude and longitude onto the sky. Notice that it doesn't perfectly match up with the azimuthal grid. In fact, the center of this grid is actually this star right here at the tail end of Ursa Minor. If you have a guess of what this star is, go ahead and type it in the chat box.
So some of our guesses are North Star and Polaris.
Very nice, yes. So Polaris is the official name of this star. That's what pops up if you click on it. And you may have seen me panning over north right here, as that is in fact the North Star. Next up, we have the DSO or Deep Space Objects button, which highlights interesting deep space objects. For example, the Andromeda Galaxy or M31. Stellarium has a nice night mode feature, so you can actually go outside with your devices and use this app while you are stargazing, and this red filter will keep you from losing your night vision. And there's also a full screen button down here that is very handy. So now that we know all about how to use Stellarium, I want to show us one of the parts of the sky that Peter mentioned. We are going to find the constellation Orion. Now, as you can see, it's about 9 o'clock right now, and Orion actually isn't up yet in the sky. So I'm going to time travel a few hours to about 4 a.m. when Orion is fully up in the east. So if you want to see Orion tonight, you can stay up really late or wake up super early. But if you'd rather not be awake at 4 a.m., you could always wait until later in the fall as Orion rises earlier and earlier in the evening. So we'll zoom in a bit and we see the stick figure kind of looks like a person. We can turn our art back on and we see that Orion's supposed to be a hunter. If we zoom in on his sword, Stellarium actually shows us some visualizations of those star-forming regions that Peter was telling us about. Of course, you wouldn't really see these in the night sky with your naked eye, but stargazing, you can still see some pretty interesting things just looking with your eyes. I'm going to turn off the art again and just looking at these stars in Orion. If you notice anything interesting about any of these stars, go ahead and type what you notice in the chat box.
We'll give a few more seconds. Anyone notice anything interesting about the stars with Orion? And we have a few. One is yellow. Is Betelgeuse about to explode? Was a question. Orion's belt, someone noticed. Anything else we should notice, Ellen?
Orion's belt is actually something really fun to point out. It's one of the easiest constellations to find because you have these 3 stars in like this perfect line. But I see some folks were pointing out Betelgeuse, and Stellarium doesn't give us the best view of the star. It looks kind of yellow or orange, but it is actually a red supergiant star. So next up to tell us more about stars like Betelgeuse is Sherwood Richards, who is an N3AS postdoctoral fellow at UC Berkeley. That just means that his job is doing research in neutrino physics and explosive astrophysics.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and answer any of your guys' questions. But first, I'm going to start with a pop quiz, see if we remember what Ellen was talking about. The name of the star on the top right corner, is it A, Cassiopeia, B, Betelgeuse, or C, Orion? I'll wait for the answers in the chat box. I'll wait for a few before I give away the answer. We've got 3 so far. All right, everybody's got it. Yes, it's Betelgeuse. So Betelgeuse is a really cool star that we're going to be talking a lot more about. But the thing to notice, just to remind you about what Ellen said, so there are lots of stars in this image. There are some stars in the foreground. You can see that the bright ones that make up the constellation. But there's also a ton of stars in the background. And each of these stars has a unique combination of brightness and color that tells us a lot about the star.
Hey, Sherwood, do you mind if we stop for a second? Let's ask the audience what they think is the difference between the colors and the brightness of stars. Can you tell us in the chat box why you think some stars are brighter and some are dim?
It's a really interesting question because you can tell a lot about the star from just the brightness and the color.
So some of the answers coming in are due, oh, they're coming in so fast I can't even keep track of them. Due to the distance from the Earth, the energy it takes to reach our eyes decreases, changing the color. That's interesting. Because the color matters on how hot the star is. They are different gases, distance and age, old and new.
All right, these are all fantastic answers. Some of them are spot on, some of them are nuanced. So let me talk about a couple of them. So distance from the Earth, absolutely. If something is farther away, then it's dimmer. Another person said that it changes color because it's so far away. That is something that happens when objects are really, really far away. It's something called redshift. But all of the stars that we see are inside of our own inside of our own Milky Way galaxy, and so they're not quite far enough away to see that redshift effect. But that is something that if you look at farther away galaxies, you do see that. They are different ages, absolutely. So the younger stars will tend to be brighter, but that's just because the younger stars are generally more massive, because the smaller stars live for a lot longer. Yeah, I think that's about it. Those are very good questions. But yeah, so like several of you pointed out, the distance to a star is really important. So before we really understand the properties of the star, we need to know how to judge the distance to the star. So to do that, we're going to talk about something called parallax. So this is something that nature has actually already figured out. So if we look at this owl, you see the owl is bobbing its head from side to side. And so what it's actually doing is trying to judge the distance to its prey, like a mouse or something. And so you can actually do this yourself too. If you have something that's really nearby and you move your head left to right, it looks like it's moving to the side a lot. But if you look at something way far in the distance and you move your head around, then it's going to look like it stays in the same spot. So by moving your head around and seeing how much the object moves, you can understand how far away an object is, just like the owl was doing to figure out how far away the mouse is. But if we want to do that for a star, the stars are way too far away for us to do that by just moving our head from side to side. But what if we could do the same thing where instead of moving our head a few inches, we're able to move by 20 million miles? Well, actually, we do this twice every year. Every 6 months, because the Earth is orbiting the sun, we go to the opposite side of the sun, which is 20 million miles away. And so if we look at the same spot in the sky and we take a picture now, and we wait 6 months and take a picture of the same spot in the sky, we can look at how far the star looks like it moved. And if it moved a lot, we know it's close by. And if it moved very little, we know it's far away. So if we do this for Betelgeuse, we figure out the Betelgeuse is about 640 light years away. Compare that to the size of our galaxy, which is something like 100,000 light years. So it's actually very nearby and a very bright star. So now we know how to figure out how far away the star is, so we can begin to understand what its true brightness means about the star. So this is probably the most iconic plot in all of stellar astrophysics. This is called the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. So we can take a star like the sun, and we can measure the average color of the sun, which is sort of in the yellow-green region. Stars that are redder are farther to the right, and stars that are bluer are farther to the left. So the redder means it's not as hot, and the bluer means it's a lot hotter. We can also look at the brightness of the sun. Stars that are cooler than the sun are farther down, and stars that are stars that are less bright than the sun are farther down, and stars that are brighter than the sun are farther up. And so what we find is that most of the stars lie along this diagonal from the top left to the bottom right. This is something we call the main sequence. And stars that live that live on this line, that have this combination of color and brightness, we know are burning hydrogen in their core. And once stars move off of this diagonal line, we know that the core has run out of hydrogen. So if we put Betelgeuse on this plot, Betelgeuse actually sits at the very top right side, and so it's a red supergiant. So let me ask you all, if since Betelgeuse is off of the HR diagram, if it's off of the main sequence up in the top right corner, what does that mean about the hydrogen in the core of the star? So I'll give you a hint. We mentioned before that all the stars on the main sequence, on this diagonal line, if a star is sitting at that combination of color and temperature, we know that it's fusing hydrogen in its core. So Betelgeuse isn't on that line. What does that mean about, is it fusing hydrogen in its core, or has it stopped fusing hydrogen in its core?
So it's kind of a question answer, running out of hydrogen?
Yeah, the question answer is correct. Probably already exploded. It could have exploded if it's 640 light years away, so it takes 640 years for the light to reach us. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's stopped fusing hydrogen.
So that's really cool. But what are red giants?
That's a good question. Red giants are, I think, some of the most exciting stars that are out there. So if we look at a red giant, it's called a red giant because it's red and it's very big. And we can't see the depths of inside of it, but we can infer what's actually inside the star. So if we look at a star like Betelgeuse, it's what you see is a huge envelope of hydrogen. But inside of this hydrogen, so ordinary stars are fusing hydrogen to make helium. But the hydrogen has already run out in the core, and actually in the very center of the core, not only has hydrogen made helium, helium has fused to make carbon and neon and oxygen and silicon, all the way up until iron. So you have all these different layers of different elements deep inside of the star. And it stops at iron because iron isn't very good at producing energy. If you fuse iron together to make heavier elements, you just stop getting energy. So this is a very rare but also a very exciting state for a star to be in. But to explain why, we have to first wander to a different part of the sky.
And before we wander to a different part of the sky, Ellen, I'll just ask Sherwood one question, is that are red giants mature or older stars? That's from our audience.
That's a really interesting question. They are, in some senses, old, but in some senses very young. So yes, they used to be a big star that was on the main sequence and burning just hydrogen, but they have already burned that out, so in some sense they're very old. But because they're so big, this burning process happened very, very quickly. So these stars are actually much, much younger than most of the stars out there. So they're old in the sense that they're almost at the end of their life, but they're very young if you compare them to other stars.
Awesome, thank you for answering that question. And Ellen, you're going to get us to the southern hemisphere to look at a few more stars right now?
Yes. So the next part of the sky we are going to check out is an object called the Large Magellanic Cloud. However, you can never see this object from Berkeley, which is in the northern hemisphere. So in Stellarium, as well as time traveling, we can also travel in space on Earth. So I'm going to click on this location stamp in my lower left, and I get this map that pops up. I can zoom out until I start seeing continents. And the place that I want to go is Santiago, Chile, because that is a place where there are lots of observatories and working astronomers. I can adjust this little blue marker to right around where I think I want to be, but I'll go ahead and zoom in on my map again so that I can get just right. Here we are. And then I just want to click use this location. And here we are in Chile. Our time down here is actually still Pacific Standard Time. So we'll want to do some time traveling until we see that it is nighttime in Chile. We'll go to around 4 o'clock standard, so that is 8 o'clock in Chile. And just looking over at the southern sky, we already see a deep space object marker that says Large Magellanic Cloud. We can go ahead and zoom in, and Stellarium gives us a visual of this object. If you don't see it right away, you can always type something that you're interested in seeing in the search bar up here. And we see Large Magellanic Cloud is the first thing that comes up, and we get a little info blurb about this object. So to tell us about why we're looking at the LMC, I will pass it back over to Sherwood.
All right, thanks a ton, Ellen. So let's see, get those slides back. All right, great. So here are 2 pictures of the Large Magellanic Cloud. The one on the left was taken in January 1987, and the one on the right was taken in March 1987. There's a small difference between them. Can anyone spot what the difference is? I'll give you a hint. It's close to one of the brightest points on the star.
Hey, Sherwood, it's kind of hard to tell. Is there any way that you can help make it easier to tell the difference?
Yeah, we can put the images on top of each other and just flip them back and forth. Maybe it's more obvious now. Yeah, there's a light there, and it looks rather dim, but now we know that if something is really far away, even if it's dim, it can be very, very bright. So what this turns out to be is a gigantic explosion, 10 trillion times as big as all the nuclear weapons that have ever existed on Earth. And the only reason that it's so faint is because it happened 50,000 light years away. So this is in a dwarf galaxy that's orbiting around the Milky Way galaxy. So this speck of light lasted for a few months, but now the LMC once again looks like the image without that speck of light. Let me ask if any of you know. Oh no, we're giving away the punchline. I was going to ask if you know what caused the explosion, but you can see it was actually a star. So if you look at if you look right at that location before the explosion happened, you can actually see a giant star. And if you look after the explosion, that star isn't there anymore. So we know that a star exploded and made this fantastic explosion.
There's nothing like getting to the punchline before the joke, huh? So let me ask everybody at home, why would a perfectly good star suddenly explode? What are your thoughts? Answer them and enter them into the chat box. So some suggestions are age, used up all of its fuel. Collisions. It stopped fusing hydrogen.
All right. Yeah, these are all very interesting answers. So age, it's used up all its fuel. Yes, that's what led up to it. But so the question that a lot of us are trying to answer is how does that state of the star after it's used its fuel, how does that lead to an explosion? Another answer was that it stopped fusing its hydrogen. I think that's kind of similar. Another one is collision. So that's interesting. There's another type of supernova explosion called a 1A supernova explosion, which is different from what we're talking about, which people don't know what causes them yet, but one of the ideas is that you can have two white dwarfs that collide with each other, and that leads to a thermonuclear explosion. But that's a different kind of explosion, but a very good idea. So we will talk about look at the structure of a red supergiant, see if we can understand what causes this explosion. So this again is a diagram of a red supergiant. Much like Betelgeuse. So like I mentioned before, there's this big chunk of iron in the core. And this iron, the chunk of iron keeps growing and growing because the other elements are fusing together to make more and more iron. And at some point, this ball of iron is so heavy that it can't support itself against collapse anymore. And between the time when it first becomes unstable to collapse to when it's collapsed by a factor of 1,000, that happens in a few hundredths of a second, or a few tenths of a second. So from this big iron core that's a few kilometers across, or a few thousand kilometers across, it collapses into a very dense proto-neutron star within a few hundredths of a second. But wait, we are talking about explosions, and so far what I've mentioned is that the star implodes and collapses. And so the big question that we've been trying to answer is, how does this implosion cause an explosion? And this is the big question that many astrophysicists have been, including myself, have been trying to answer for more than 60 years. I haven't been trying to answer it for more than 60 years, but other people have. So I can tell you about the theory that we have, but I'll remind you this is a long-standing problem. So we're going to need your help as well by the time that you become an astrophysicist, that there will still be lots of questions that we're trying to answer. So here's the main idea. When the star collapses, it forms this, what's called a protoneutron star. That's the central dot in the middle. And this is very, very dense. It's something as dense as a neutron star, which is 10 to the 14 times as dense as water. What you see outside of that shell is a supersonically infalling star. So the center of the star is collapsed, and the rest of the star is careening inwards. And at that blue curve, the outer blue circle, that's the shock front. So it hits the shock front, and it suddenly compresses in there, and this matter drifts toward the protoneutron star. And as it does that, it gets very, very hot and emits a ton of elementary particle called neutrinos. These neutrinos are able to carry that energy from that very dense inner region and deposit some of that energy into these plumes that are welling up and pushing up against this supersonically infalling rest of the star. And by depositing that energy from the center to this ballooning material, we think that that's how we're able to explode the star, just by dumping a ton of energy into those plumes, which eventually push out and blow up the rest of the star. But again, I'll remind you that this is, we have some evidence that we think this is what happens, but it's still a long-standing problem. So we look forward to working with you when you become a scientist and start working on these problems yourself.
Thanks, Sherwood. So just to wrap it all up, I hope everyone has learned just as much as I have this session. Today, we looked at Betelgeuse. Sherwood shared that it is a red supergiant, 11 times the mass of the sun. Ellen helped us look up the Large Magellanic Cloud using the web-based tool Stellarium, and that stars can explode. But it's really a little bit more complicated phenomenon where a star's core collapses because it has run out of fuel. And as a reminder from the earlier part of our presentation, Peter shared with us that stars from the gravitational collapse of cold, dense clouds of gas and dust. Many of the signs of star formation are invisible to the human eye and can only be seen using telescopes that see in infrared light. If you're looking to learn more about astrophysics, you should check out Search the Sky and Astrophysics Fridays on the Lawrence Hall of Science YouTube channel. Here at Berkeley Lab, our researchers are mapping the universe, and the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, or DESI, is helping us to learn about the evolution of the entire universe. You can actually check out the imaging tool that has been developed based on this work at desi.lbl.gov. For our final few minutes, we will open the floor for more questions. Put them in the chat box, and we will share them with our experts.
I'll say we'll have one quick question, and I'll come online for this one. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you to our presenters. Someone asked if we're sharing the slides. We don't share the slides, but we do share the recording. So we are recording this, and it will be uploaded along with the worksheet that goes along, and many of the links that we shared in our chat box are on that same worksheet. So they're all available, including, I think we had a map of the night sky back from June, I believe, that John Erickson, who's at the planetarium for the Lawrence Hall of Science, shared with us back when we did this originally, and that's still available on our site, as well as the Lawrence Hall of Science has plenty of other resources around this topic that are great to see. And you can also hear from Ellen again as she helps with the series that we just talked about on YouTube. But now we'll let you get to questions. And our first one is it the Earth's core iron? Could it collapse?
Yes, it is. No, it can't, at least not according to, no. So the reason why it collapses is because it's so big. So there's a fundamental limit for how big a ball of iron can get before it collapses under its own gravity. And that limit happens to be something like 1.4 times the mass of the sun. And so because the iron core of the Earth is so much smaller than that, you know, it won't ever collapse because it's just not big enough.
So a follow-up to
And to
that
follow
is,
that up. Yeah.
will our sun collapse?
Yeah, that's another fun question, that the fate of our sun. So our sun isn't big enough to make iron. So because you really need very big stars which have very, very high pressures at the center to mash these atoms together to create iron. So the sun will turn hydrogen to helium, but that's as far as it'll go. Because it's not big enough to slam those atoms together, we won't ever get an iron core that will collapse.
So another question that just came in is, what causes the solar spots?
I can answer that unless there's somebody else who wanted to. All right. Yeah, so that's also a cool thing. Oh, do you want to go, Peter?
Oh, no, it's fine. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the sun is really cool. It's the surface of the sun is very turbulent. So you have all these the fluid moving around different directions, and there's also a magnetic field that's tied to it. And so as the fluid is moving, you're tangling up this magnetic field, and occasionally you get a very strong chunk of the magnetic field, and so that chunk will protrude out of the surface of the sun, and those where you have that very strong magnetic field coming out of the sun and also going back into the sun, you see sunspots because the gas is colder there.
I'll join in and say, do you all have and I'll start with Ellen and then Peter and Sherwood, a specific part of astrophysics or astronomy that brought you into studying this specific area? And is there something that you would, that really made you say, this is what I want to do for my career and what I want to study in school? I'll start with you, Ellen.
Yeah, sure. So my current research at the Space Sciences Lab is actually in high mass X-ray binaries, which are things like a star and a compact high mass object like a neutron star or a black hole. And doing this research actually got me really interested in continuing to do work in high energy astrophysics. So I'm actually really interested in things like collisions, which somebody mentioned. I was really excited about the neutron star merger in 2017 that I'm sure folks have heard about. So that's sort of the area that I'm into. And then as a hobby, I'm really into stargazing as well.
And Peter?
Yeah, I got involved. So actually, the experiment I showed, BLAST, the balloon project, its real mission is to learn about how magnetic fields affect star formation, and magnetic fields in astronomy are like famously hard to figure out because they're invisible. You can't see them. You can only figure out indirectly how they're doing anything. So yeah, it just seems like a cool, hard problem that it impacts a lot of other stuff. And I got to go to Antarctica. It was fun.
I'm sure Wood, if you wanted to follow up, and then we'll get back to the chat box.
Yeah, I just always thought astronomy was cool, and I was interested enough in math and physics that in high school and college I took classes in math and physics, and that was that. Yeah, it's just cool.
All right, thanks. So someone said there was on social media a photo called Betelgeuse, a supernova. So did Betelgeuse become a supernova? Do you have an estimation for that if it did not happen? Ellen, if you want to talk about Betelgeuse as a possible supernova, is it one? Is it not?
From what I know, there's a lot of debate, so I'm wondering what Sherwood or Peter might have to say.
Yeah, so if Betelgeuse had exploded, you would see the explosion very, very brightly. Well, I guess we wouldn't because it's on the other side of the planet at night right now. But you know, when it's in the sky, you would see it very clearly. And so I think if I'm seeing the images that you're talking about, it's the images are what would it look like if it were to explode. But it has not exploded as of this point.
I would stay up till 4 a.m. for that.
Yeah.
So another question are, oh, I'm sorry, Ellen, did you want to say something
I
to
was
that?
going to answer the moon phases question.
Oh yeah, so that was, what are the phases of the moon?
Yeah, so we actually have a really fun activity in the planetarium at the Lawrence Hall for this, but of course the planetarium is closed. So when you don't see the moon at all, that is a new moon. And the way that the phases work is that the moon seems to fill itself in from right to left. So you start with waxing crescent, and then what a lot of us think of as a half moon, where the right half is the moon and the left half is still dark, is actually first quarter. And then you have waxing gibbous, which kind of looks like a camel hump. And then you have the full moon, and then it starts to get dimmer. So again, starting from the right to left, we have waning gibbous, where the right is dark. And then third quarter is the flip side of first quarter. After that is waning crescent, and then you're back to new moon.
And then I think this is for Peter. Is the balloon observatory launched from McMurdo base or at the South Pole itself?
Oh yeah, this person knows their Antarctica geography. Yeah, the balloons get launched from there's a NASA facility at McMurdo Station, which is on the coast of Antarctica, quote unquote coast, because it's, you know, it's all sea ice. But yeah, it's on the kind of New Zealand side of Antarctica, and actually being on the coast means it's not as cold as it could be. It's still pretty cold, but you know, it's, you know, minus 30 every day in the summer at the South Pole, so it's not that bad.
Awesome, thank you. If anyone else, hopefully we got everybody's questions. And with that, it's about 3 o'clock, so we are going to end our session for today. And I just want to say thank you again to our experts in stars. And again, please use that reference sheet. You can see everything that they were referencing within this session in there. And we look forward to being back with you all probably starting late September and in October. And I will let the one come in, that one last one come in if you want to stay on, but for those of you, we'll be ending very soon. So do telescopes see into the past? So if the sun exploded, it would take us 8 minutes to see that, but would it, so I'll go ahead and say, I saw you already shaking your head, Ellen, about do telescopes see into the past?
Yes. So I think Peter and Sherwood both touched on this. Because of these great distances and the fact that light travels at a finite speed, not infinitely fast or instantaneously fast, when you are looking at the night sky with a telescope or even with just your own eyes, you are technically looking into the past. Yes. And if anyone else wanted to elaborate more.
Yeah, there's I would say that's entirely accurate. There are some things that people are looking at. So for instance, with Betelgeuse, we expect that in the hours to days before it explodes, there's things that should be happening on the inside. And so one of the exciting things that people are looking at is, you know, maybe we can see signs of something exploding before it explodes. It doesn't get around the whole nothing travels faster than the speed of light, but we might be able to sense some of those signs before it actually happens.
Awesome. Okay, I think that was the last question. So have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to all of our presenters, and Jennifer for asking all the many questions that we have. And now I think we've learned quite a bit more. So awesome. Thanks, everybody, for the comments. We will see you next time.
Thanks for the fantastic questions.
Thanks.